to introduce to you really one of the incredible young scholars who has joined the field already, Mehdy Shaddel, Mr. Mehdy Shaddel. Mehdy is going to be defending his dissertation in the months to come. So as far as we are concerned, he is Dr. Mehdy Shaddel. And he's seriously one of the brilliant young sort of additions to our academic world. Mehdy has been writing since for a while already, for at least a decade and a half. He started as an autodidact, I believe, when he was younger, and then he joined the University of Leiden, where he's completing his dissertation, and he is already sort of has a postdoc, Mehdy, at the I'm not sure, is it Aga Khan University?
Aga Khan University in London, yes.
Yes,
University in London, Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations.
Excellent, excellent, Mehdy. Yes. So just a little bit about his work for those of you who I really suggest that everybody goes and looks at Mehdy's sort of portfolio at academia.edu and see the kind of work that he's doing. He is, as he puts it, a scholar of Near Eastern history. He specializes in Islamic origins and the socio-economic, political, and religious history of the early Muslim empire. At its core, Mehdy says, his work blends together philology with theoretical and comparative insights to address broader interdisciplinary themes such as apocalypticism and eschatology, and forgive me for my faux pas there, and comparative empires and state formation, with early Islam as a case study. His publications have appeared already in such venues as the Bulletin of the Oriental and African Studies, Journal of Royal Asiatic Society, Arabica, Their Islam, Journal of Semitic Studies, and Jerusalem Studies in Arabic and Islam. He is currently working on a monograph on the Sufyanids, tentatively titled Beginning of the Second Muslim Civil War, 660 to 684. And he's also editing and translating the Kitāb al-wuzarāʻ wa-l-kuttāb of Muḥammad ibn ʿAbdūs al-Jahshiyārī, and with Samuel J. Noble, he is doing the Arabic versions of the pseudonymous, yeah, and Jewish tractate, Doctrina Iacobi. I am I'm very happy that we have Mehdy here, and without any further ado, I would like Mehdy to please take on the floor from now on. Mehdy Jan.
Thank you very much, Paravanajan, for the very kind and generous introduction, as well as for inviting me here. It's an absolute pleasure. It's very wonderful to be here today. And a big word of thank you for everyone else, for all the members of the audience, for being present here to listen to my talk today. Thank you very much. So, I need to actually offer corrective before moving on. My first publication appeared at the end of 2016. So it's been less than one and a half decade. I'm still young.
All right. We forgive you.
Thank you. Thank you. So can I start sharing my screen then? Maybe if there are no other issues, if you can hear me clearly, I'd like to actually start the actual presentation. I hear background noise though. I think someone is not muted, maybe. It's just, oh yeah, thank you. So, well, what I'm going to look into as part of this talk today is rather overarching issue. I'm going to take an overarching look at the history of the Umayyad period, the early Islamic period, beginning with the conquests and the Umayyad period up to the Abbasid revolution and the aftermath. So it's a very wide issue, and I'll only be able to actually touch upon some of the most important and salient themes and issues here. So, given its wide, actually, the wide nature of the issue, the topic, I'd like to actually remain focused on two main issues. So the two main issues are the root cause of the Abbasid revolution. A veritable body of scholarship has been dedicated to this subject since the beginning of since the actually late 19th century. If we start counting the Carlo van Vlotho, who actually wrote a monograph on the subject in the 1880s, if I remember correctly. And there's been debate as to whether this was an Arab revolt or a Persian revolution or social revolution instigated by the Persians, mostly predominantly Persian Mawali, who were discriminated against by the Arabs. And these have been the terms in which most of the scholarship on the Abbasid revolution has been actually conducting this debate. And there's been a rather different body of scholarship which has been by and large, unfortunately, non-intersecting with this earlier body of the scholarship. And this later other body of the scholarship deals with the taxation regime and the nature of taxation regime. And most of this scholarship, for obvious reasons, draws on the papyrological evidence. But there have been some problems here for different reasons. And in order to actually ascertain what the problems are and what is going to how we need to approach the problem, this is actually my tentative my plan for this talk, which is actually part of a monograph project, aspects of which I'm going to present to you today. And as I said earlier, I will only be able to deal with certain aspects of the issue today, not all of it, but I'm happy to address any further queries or questions about those any aspects that have not been highlighted or explained in detail here and the Q&A. Hopefully we'll have more time to actually go into more detail during the Q&A. So as part of this talk, I'm first going to deal with not only the taxation regime, but the other side of the coin as well. And that's like, any fiscal apparatus, fiscal system has got two sides, supply and demand. So in this case, supply is actually offered in the form of taxation. So the conquerors, the ruling elites of any basically tributary state actually exact tribute and taxes from the subaltern, and then this forms the supply of the fiscal, let's say. And then there's a demand side, which is expenditure, and people who actually benefit from the revenues which are thus raised. So there are people who pay taxes, and then people who benefit from the revenues thus raised. And after this, I'm going to revisit the terms of membership in the Conquest Society based on my findings after close scrutiny of both the supply and demand sides. What do I mean by terms of membership in the Conquest Society? it means if we think of the conquerors as a ruling elite and the conquered as the subaltern, and the conquerors as people who benefited from, who reaped the fruits of the conquests. Actually, so initially they were just conquerors, but over the course of time, new people came in, newcomers actually joined the ranks of the elites, and various forms of accommodation were reached with local elites as well. So who actually ended up, after the dust of the war, the conquests were settled, who ended up benefiting from the fruits of the conquests, by which dint they benefited from the conquests, actually, from the status quo that was established after the conquest. So the way I refer to this question is just the terms of membership in the conquest society. Who got to be a member of the conquest society? And then, as you can imagine, in any kind of social setting, in any society, when you have a group of elites who are better off, and a group of subaltern who work more and benefit less, or are not as well off as the rulers, you end up in, like in all other unequal societies, you end up with some kind of social upheaval. And then the various interest groups here end up negotiating the terms of their disagreement in various ways. Sometimes, especially in modern times, through electoral politics, but in pre-modern times, through social contention and sometimes rebellion. And this is an important factor in what's going to come up later on in this talk. And the rulers also attempted to actually grapple with these problems. The Umayyad caliphs, in particular, these actually contradictions, inbuilt contradictions of the fiscal system, came to a head during the Umayyad period, and it was the Umayyad caliphs and their advisors who were left with dealing with the problems. And then these reforms eventually failed, resulted in the outbreak of even further discontent, which eventually culminated in the fall of the Umayyad dynasty and the coming to power of the Abbasids, and the formation of classical Islamic law, fiscal law as we know it. So these are the issues I'm going to touch upon as part of this talk today. So let's begin with the easier part, taxation regime. Why easier? Not thanks to me, but thanks to my colleagues, mostly papyrologists, who have been working on this subject for over a century. It's a very hard work, working with abstruse evidence in the form of fragmentary papyri is very difficult. So, and we have to be grateful to generations of qualified and very well qualified and very erudite papyrologists who have actually treaded this path before us, before me, and their work is of important help for my project here. So the first actually the first large batch of papyri from the early Islamic period, which were published together, was actually the corpus of Qurra ibn Sharik, the governor of Egypt, under the Caliph al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik in the early 8th century. A large number of the Arabic actually dossier from the Qurra archive was published in 1907 by Karl Heinrich Becker. And then the Greek material, most of the Greek material were published 3 years later by Sir Harold Idris Bell. And both of them, after going through the evidence of the papyri, arrived at the same conclusion, that the central authorities in Fustat, the capital of Egypt, did not concern themselves with the manner in which these taxes were raised. They only sent demand notes for lump sums to local authorities, and it was left to the local authorities themselves to actually break down the amounts that were due to their districts. In other words, the central authorities based on Fustat, the Muslims, Muslim conquerors and Fustat, did not concern themselves with any such issues as the religious status of the local taxpayers. and there were no such things as poll and land taxes demanded from the center in this period. If there were any poll and land taxes, they were demanded by the local Christian, mostly Christian authorities from their constituents in order to raise the sums, the lump sums demanded by the central authorities. But although we actually arrived at this conclusion over 100 years ago, this did not become received wisdom immediately. In most of the historical scholarship on social discontent in the Umayyad period and the root causes of the Abbasid revolution. Why is that? Because one of the most important publications on the subject, probably the one important publication that set the tone for the next century of the scholarship, was Wellhausen. Julius Wellhausen's Das Arabische Reich und seine Sturz, the Arab Kingdom and its Fall, published in 1902, which actually appeared before the publication of these papyri, this dossier, by Bell and Becker. And then Wellhausen's followers somehow failed to appropriately engage with the findings of Bell and Baker. And people like Daniel Dennett, for example, actually even pour scorn on, in particular, Bell, because he wasn't an Arabist, but also Baker, for their contention that tax status in this early period didn't have anything to do with religion. Why is that? Because there are narrative sources that present the Umayyad government as turning away a large number of converts from the garrison towns on the grounds that, and this is explained because, it is explained as an attempt by on the part of the authorities to shore up the tax base. Why? Because if these converts were all to be actually recognized as actual converts, the tax base would be hurt, because as converts, they would no longer would qualify for payment of jizya, needed to be exempted from the payment of jizya. This would have actually hurt government revenues. And because most of these scholars, most of these the commentators, modern commentators on Umayyad history, were unable to account for the actions of the Umayyad authorities in any other way. They just decided to actually take issue with the conclusions of Baker and Bill, rather than come up with a different solution. And then, as an end result, a byproduct of this treatment of the nature of the taxation regime, was that the Abbasid revolution became, at least this group of scholars came to view the Abbasid revolution as the result of discrimination against the non-Arab Mawali on the part of the ruling Arabs. And then this was some kind of social revolution in which the discriminated rose against their oppressors. But there is, and this is my major contention today, there is another way of accounting for what we see and the material, both papyrological evidence and literary sources, that actually has not been explored so far. And this is what I'm going to do today. And this way, I believe this is the only way in which we could actually reconcile both the narrative evidence as well as the papyrological evidence. So what I would like to do first is to agree with Baker and Bell's conclusions that taxation in the early Islamic period, up to the end of the Umayyad period, as will become clear later on, this was the case until the end of the Umayyad period. Up to the end of the Umayyad period, taxation had nothing to do with one's religious status. How do we know this? In addition to the papyrological evidence caught by Baker and Bell, and we've got additional finds of papyri since then, of course, and these new actually discoveries also confirm Bell's and Baker's hunch based on that one dossier. in addition to papyrological evidence, we do have normative texts from the 8th and 9th century and later on, which I believe try to impose their normative views on the narratives of the past. But within these self-same normative texts from later centuries, there are incidental references to events of the past which do not agree with their prescriptive description of the nature of the fiscal regime in early Islam. So I am inclined to give more credence to these incidental references in these narrative sources because they are incidental, rather than to the prescriptive accounts of the foundation of the first Diwan, which I shall turn to presently. And this means that conversion would not free the convert from any tax obligations up to the end of the Umayyad period. So the bottom line of what these actually starting assumptions as well as conclusions is that, well, basically up to the end of the Umayyad period, it was the conquerors taxing the conquered. So having dealt with the supply side, now we need to deal with the demand side. So what was going on the demand side? So what we do know is that registers were set up called the Diwan, and these Diwans were actually meant to facilitate the payments of stipends called ata, and rations called rizq to the conquerors. This is the easy part. But who was enrolled in the Diwan? Who got to enroll in the Diwan? According to our normative texts, it was meant for the Muslims, for the payment of the Muslims. Incidental references and these same sources, though, do mention non-Muslims who also were registered in the Diwan. However, and there is also, it's also very commonplace in modern scholarship to habitually refer to Diwan as an institution to facilitate the payment of stipends to the Arabs. But this is unattested in the narrative sources, in the primary source material. And well, assuming that Arab identity, as we know it from later centuries, was operative in the 7th century, well, there were millions of Arab in the Syrian and Arabian deserts, in the deserts of Syria and Iraq, and the Arabian heartlands who were not enrolled in Diwan. And in addition to that, there were lots of non-Arabs on the Diwan. So the upshot of this is that, well, this institution could not have been meant for Arabs either, because there are non-Arabs on the Diwan and there are Arabs who are not part of the Diwan. So it's got nothing to do with Arabness and Arab identity. But if we turn to early papyri, and especially papyri in Greek, it seems that they invariably refer to a category called called the muhajirun, singular muhajir, as the beneficiaries of the taxes thus raised. So these people received stipends from the taxes that the conquerors raised. People called muhajirun, i.e., people who make or have made the hijrah. So what does this mean? There isn't much time to actually go into detail about the significance of this term, but we can actually talk about it in the Q&A. Suffice it to say, for the time being, that hijrah, in this sense, the Semitic root based on newly discovered evidence, means almost invariably in the North and South Arabian inscriptions means to settle, to adopt a sedentary lifestyle as against a nomadic lifestyle. And then there's an old stratum of the legal literature attested solely in Abu Ubaid al-Qasim ibn Sallam's Kitāb al-Amwāl, which describes the fay, which fay itself can be defined as the net wealth of the conquered territories, which whose benefits, the benefits of which are actually go towards the payment, or the proceeds of which go towards the payments of stipends and rations to the conquerors. So that's what fay means. And according to Abu Ubaid, there are two definitions for the proper use of the fay. One is that it's the communal property of the Muhajirun, paid out to them as stipends. The other is that it's the communal property of Muslims. So these are two conflicting views, both reflected in Abu Ubaid's Kitāb al-Amwal, but not elsewhere. Other later legal literature described the fay as the communal property of the Muslims and Muslims alone. And I would like to argue, as we go on in this talk, that this other view, the predominant Abbasid view that views the fay as the communal property of the Muhajirun, is later development, an Abbasid development. And early on, the fay was conceived of as the communal property of the Muhajirun, the settlers in garrison towns. And then again, there are incidental references in the narrative sources, which also give us to understand that actually the litmus test for membership of the Diwan was making the hijrah and becoming a muhajir. So this account I've produced here is one of the more interesting examples for me personally. It's from the Kitāb al-Aghani of Abu al-Faraj al-Isfahani, and describes a poet, Mehdy Shaddel poet, who was actually, once in reduced circumstances, it was suggested to him, his wife suggested to him, that maybe you could actually make the hijrah to Medina together with us. Hijrah here in the official sense of, adopting a sedentary lifestyle, and sell off your livestock, abandon your nomadic lifestyle, make the hijrah to Medina, and then enroll in the Diwan for stipends. Then we'll no longer have any financial problems. So this is, the backdrop to this story actually assumes that making the hijrah, the assumption behind this story is that making the hijrah qualifies one for being in receipt of a stipends. So these were the people, Muhajirun were the people who were beneficiaries of the Diwan system, it seems. But now let's turn to the organization of the Diwan. It's not basically axiomatic and accepted by virtually everyone, based by both literary and papyrological evidence that each garrison town had a Diwan of its own. Sorry, my PowerPoint says each Diwan in a garrison town. It means it's supposed to say each garrison town had a Diwan of its own. I'm sorry. Each garrison town or miss had a Diwan of its own, and each garrison town or miss administered the territories that its inhabitants, its Muhajirun, had conquered, and was apportioned to it as part of its administrative hinterland. And then the Muhajirun settling in each of these garrison towns had the duty to do garrison duty, and the hinterland and the administrative hinterland of these garrison towns on a rotating basis. And the taxes raised from each administrative district centered in a garrison town would eventually go to that garrison town to meet the need for the payment of the Muhajirun in that garrison town. But most of these Muhajirun came from a tribal background. So as a consequence, the Diwan was also organized along tribal lines. This posed a problem, though. Where is the problem? Obviously, in the course of time, the conquerors realized that they needed to accommodate some members of the local populations as well. People, some of whom either did not come from a tribal background, or their tribes were not otherwise represented on the Diwan. So you cannot actually organize an entire category, introduce an entire category for just one person. So these people needed to be affiliated with the Diwan in some other way. And it is my contention, this is also a long story, but it is my contention, we can, I have a debate about this in the Q&A, but it is my contention that this is the raison d'etre of the institution of wa-l-kuttāb. wa-l-kuttāb was introduced to facilitate the attachment of people from a non-tribal background to the diwan. And here are actually some incidental references to the nature of wa-l-kuttāb as attested in the Diwan of Egypt. So this is actually from the Tarikh al-Misriyin of Ibn Yunus, and Ibn Yunus claims to have seen the wa-l-kuttāb or the clientage of certain individuals as such in the Diwan of Egypt. And these wa-l-kuttābs, these mawali and their wa-l-kuttāb are always attested as part of a tribe in the Diwan. So you may actually be affiliated to a tribe through a patron, through an individual, but ultimately what matters for you on the Diwan is the tribe of which you are a member. In this way, you become a member in this way. So in order to receive a stipend, to become in receipt of the stipends, to receive the stipends, for people who were not members of the conquering elites, they had to do two actions. First, make the hijrah and become a muhajir, and second, if they were not from a tribe which was already represented on the Diwan, they had to procure a mawla, a patron for themselves, and then attach themselves to this person and become attached to Diwan through this person and become a mawla. So in other terms, wa-l-kuttāb became the gate to the ranks of the conquerors. And it was, of course, when you have a gate such as that allows you access to the ranks of the elites, there are lots of social climbers who want to use that opportunity to better themselves. And this is how problems ensued. But the problem was that government coffers were only so large as to accommodate so many newcomers. The government could not actually, the authorities cannot allow everyone to join the Diwan because they only had so much money to pay so many people. And on the other hand, they didn't need all of these people. The government only hires people it needs. If they don't have any need for these people, what's the point of paying them? Especially when money is limited, the supply of money is limited. So the rest had to be turned away. So many people, many of these newcomers, though, actually converted to Islam as well. In some cases, obviously, this conversion was a conversion of heart. Some of them probably were not even interested in any kind of financial reward for the conversion, but we do not hear of them in the sources because they did not cause any problems for the government. The ones who did cause problems for the government were those who actually converted to Islam to actually advance this claim to being a member of the conquest society and then attempted to make the hijrah in order to benefit from the payment of stipends. And these people were the people who were being turned away by the government in large numbers and ended up becoming unhappy with the status quo. What happened as a result? Like, the government had no interest in these people, but there were other people who could potentially be interested, and these would be newcomers. Who were these people? Of course, this left them constituency, the would-be newcomers, a constituency who could be courted by the Umayyads' rivals. So there are accounts of many rebellions. In the account of Ibn al-Ash'af's rebellion, it's not quite clear. I have sort of tried to impose an interpretation on certain accounts of Ibn al-Ash'af's rebellion in order to arrive at this conclusion. But in the accounts of many other rebellions in the later Umayyad period, it's quite clear. No interpretation required. It's exactly what the texts say, especially in the history of the patriarchs of Alexandria, that there were many revolts in which the rebels tried to actually raise an army by courting the would-be newcomers who had been turned away by the government and offering them to do what for them the government had failed to do, meaning enrolling them in the Diwan, and allowing them to join the ranks of the conquerors. So this caused a huge problem for the ruling authorities. The problem was apparently strong enough, big enough by the reign of the Caliph Suleiman, who came to power shortly after the death of his father's notorious and his elder brother's notorious administrator, al-Hajjaj. The problem was so strong by this period that Suleiman was forced to allow some of these converts who were turned away by al-Hajjaj to come back to the garrison towns and settle in garrison towns. But this only solved some of the problem because he allowed some of them to come back. But over the course of time, there were more people who wanted to join the conquest society, and there was no mechanism for accommodating these people. So Suleiman's successor, Umar II, attempted to actually come up with a more fundamental solution. And he issued 2 decrees. One of them is known as the Fiscal Rescript of Umar II. It's known to modern scholarship as the Fiscal Rescript of Umar II. The second one is unpublished. It's been found in a manuscript which is the oldest manuscript of the Sirat Umar, the biography of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, by the Egyptian scholar Ibn Abdul Hakam. And it's being published by Sean Anthony, who kindly shared the draft with me. And these 2, I believe, after close scrutiny of these 2 edicts, I believe these are 2 twin edicts which were issued simultaneously by Umar II. The Fiscal Rescript predominantly deals with the supply side, so the final parts of the Fiscal Rescript are all attempts at regulating certain abuses that hurt the taxpayer and would eventually, in Umar's opinion, hurt the tax base too. While the other decree, called Risalat Umar ibn Abdul Aziz fi Sadaqa wal-Maqnam wal-Fay', the edict or the epistle of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz concerning Sadaqa, certain category of taxes or alms, whatever, and booty, and conquest revenue. This is the title of the edict. That deals with the demand side. How this revenue is to be, the revenues thus raised are to be dispersed, and who is to benefit from them. But the first edict, the Fiscal Rescript, at the beginning also deals with a more important and apparently more burning issue. Umar starts by declaring that, well, declaring or stipulating, setting out what he thinks are the tenets of Islam. And one of them is hijrah. And then he says that it is incumbent upon us to open the doors of hijrah, to open the gates of hijrah for anyone who's become a Muslim. Allow everyone in. So from now on, anyone who has converted to Islam is allowed to make the hijrah, become a muhajir, and by implication also receive the stipends. So it seems that by the time of Umar II, the problem has become so burning, the issue so urgent, that some reform was needed. And Umar was basically equating here the conversion with making the hijrah. So if, you could still stay put, not make the hijrah as a Muslim, as a convert in this period. But if you so wished, Umar was going to allow you to join the conquest society. If you so wished, you could just abandon your land, your belongings, your property in the countryside, move to a garrison town, make the hijrah, and start receiving stipends, if you so wished. But there was a problem, again, because this was not a workable solution. There were large droves of people, because one of the requirements was that you had to abandon your property in the countryside, more well-off people were, of course, disinclined to actually make the hijrah join, and to sort of use Umar's edict, Umar's decree to better themselves, because they would be worse off actually by doing this. But there were large droves of less well-off people who were happy to do whatever they didn't have, probably, and the countryside and move to the garrison towns, make the hijrah in order to receive stipends. And the government, again, could not accommodate all of these people. So immediately after Umar's death, his successors reversed his measures. And a rebellion broke out in North Africa as a result. And the governor there, Yazid II, Umar's successor's appointee, Yazid ibn Abi Muslim, the governor there, was assassinated. So a temporary halt had to be put by the new caliph, Yazid II, on his reversal of Umar's measures. So he allowed some of the people who already actually benefited from Umar's decrees to stay put, and remain members of the conquest society, but disallowed the coming of any newcomers in this way. What happened eventually, though, was that as a result, this problem continued unabated, and eventually the Abbasids, one group of rebels, the Abbasids, or the Hashemite revolutionaries, managed to win over enough support and were lucky enough to actually rebel at an opportune moment, right during the Third Civil War amongst the Umayyad family, and they managed to overthrow the Umayyads. What we see afterwards is very interesting. So one of the earlier papyri I showed you, let me go back to it. Immediately after the Abbasid revolution, we see references to tax categories that are tied to religious status. This is the first attestation of a tax category tied to religious status and the papyrological record from the early Islamic period. And this is dated to 160, the reign of the Abbasid Caliph, third Abbasid Caliph al-Mahdi. This one, the photo I have actually produced here, dates the reign of Harun al-Rashid, and this is the second attestation. And it talks about tax categories for Muslims as against tax categories for al-Dhimma, the people who enjoy protected status, Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, other people. And apart from this papyrological evidence, these fragments of papyri, we also have evidence, textual evidence, and the history of the patriarchs of Alexandria and the Chronicle of Zutnin. Both English and French translations of the Chronicle of Zutnin are mistaken here because, unfortunately, the translators were not Islamicists. They were Syriacists. So you have to consult the actual Syriac text. Syrian Muslim apocalypses from the early Islamic period dating to the reign of the first Abbasid Caliph Safa in Nuaym's Kitāb al-Fitan, as well as incidental references in Arabic narrative sources, indicate that the nature of fiscal regime changed at this time. So they're all explicit about the abolition of both the stipends and the ration system, but they don't tell us what happened afterwards, what kind of new system was brought about by the Abbasids. Reading between the lines, though, it appears that immediately after the coming of the Abbasids to power, no longer we do now have a professional army. We don't have militias, as we had militias raised from the Muhajirun, as we had in the Umayyad period, who received stipends, but rather a professional army, and the salary of this new army is, most of the time, sometimes, by my count, I have been able to actually find some 40 attestations of it being called rizq in the sense of a salary in cash, and maybe 3 or 4 attestations where it's still called ata, but I believe this is just anachronism. These references to this salary as ata are probably just anachronistic. It could happen. But when you have the odds are when you have 40 attestations against 3 or 4, 14 is still counting. The odds are that the name of this salary was, this new salary was rizq, and this was a standard salary paid to a professional army. And this is also evident from such early sources as the Risala of government advisor Ibn al-Muqaffa a prominent advisor to the second Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur, where the salary of the army is called rizq. So the fiscal system changed, and now law had to be changed, or rather codified, alongside with the change in the fiscal system. And interestingly enough, the oldest fiscal manual we have from the early Islamic period is composed by the chief judge of the Abbasid court at the behest of the ruling caliph, Harun al-Rashid. It's the Kitāb al-Amwal of the Kitāb al-Kharaj of al-Qadi Abu Yusuf al-Ansari. And the Kitāb al-Kharaj only gives voice to one opinion, that the faith as the communal property of the Muslims. But Abu Yusuf does cite certain scriptural proof texts that the adherents of the other view, that it's the communal property of the Muhajirun as well, but without being explicit on this. He only cites the scriptural proof texts in order to add certain other Quranic verses to them to say that, well, this means later converts. So it's the communal property of all the Muslims. While a slightly later authority, Abu Ubaid, whom we've already met, in his Kitāb al-Amwal, gives voice to both opinions. And given the developments I tried to map out as part of this talk, that is why I think the other minority view in Abu Ubaid's, only attested in Abu Ubaid's Kitāb al-Amwal, is the older view, because it actually comports with the papyrological evidence from the Umayyad period. And, well, it also helps us understand certain of the actions of the actors of early Islam in the Umayyad period and come up with an explanation for events that takes account of both the papyrological and literary evidence without having to wish away one group or one part of it. And this is, well, how Islamic fiscal law became codified eventually. And certainly because beneficiaries of this fiscal system were to be identified by religion as Muslim, it was only natural for the people who were actually contributing to the fisc, meaning the taxpayers, to be identified by religion as well. So once it becomes religionized, once the fiscal system becomes religionized, it cannot go just in one direction. It has to go in both directions. So the beneficiaries of the system are Muslims. It means that if the beneficiaries of the system are the Muslims, it means that the taxpayers have to be non-Muslims. This is why the first references to taxpayers being al-Dhimma and the Dhimmis, the al-Dhimma, having tax categories of their own, and the papyrological record only appears in the Abbasid period, beginning of the Abbasid period, because it only changed, or it was only differentiated based on religion beginning with the Abbasid period, as a result of the changes that the Abbasids brought about. And, well, this was eventually codified by Abu Yusuf, and this is how we got classical Islamic tax law. Thank you very much for your attention. So, should I stop the share? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mehdy John, for that excellent talk. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. We have a number of very distinguished colleagues with us that I would like to say special hello to Fred Donner, Professor Michael Cook, Professor Donner, Professor Hoyland, and others. If I have Ali Aghaye Nazanin and everybody, thank you all for being here. Mehdy John, I'm sure there are a lot of questions for you. Will you allow me to make an announcement before we start? Yes? Okay. So the announcement is the following, colleagues, and we are very pleased at the Circle and at the Ralph Bunche Institute to start our collaboration with Professor Esteban Cristo Nagy, who is the director of the Center for the Study of Islam at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. Esteban and his colleagues are advertising our events. We are advertising their events, and I'm hoping that we would have more and more collaborators as we go along with the Circle. So without further ado, I want to start the question and answer section. And for the Q&A, I asked you, I'm getting my prompts from the assistant director of the Ralph Bunche Institute, Ms. Sofner. For the Q&A, I ask you to indicate that you want to ask a question in the chat. If you want to ask your question, please write. If you want to ask your own question, please write stack. Otherwise, please write your questions in the chat box, and I will begin by whoever begins the questioning. Floor is yours. I have questions, but I would like okay, anybody? I'm sure there are many questions for Mehdi here. Okay, I'm going to start myself. Mehdi Jan, this is really fascinating. I mean, I'm so happy that you have steered away from this racialist sort of atmosphere of the 19th and 20th centuries. And you're not talking necessarily about Arab versus Iranian and Mawali as Iranians or as Arabs. I mean, that perspective and that discourse has had its life already. So it is very, very interesting to me. I want you to please explain what do you mean with hijrah when, for instance, your conqueror is sitting, say, in Tirmiz, you know, into Khorasan, right? Where do they go? Because we know there's a garrison already in Tirmiz, right? But where would they go in order to make the hijrah? I'm a little bit unclear about that.
Thank you very much. That's a very important question, Parvanajan. So there's a prehistory to hijrah dating to the time of Muhammad himself. So at the time of Muhammad, this is strictly about nomads versus settled people. So we've got Fred Dunner here. He was probably the first person to actually elaborate on this and detail in his first book, The Early Islamic Conquests. And but the exact actually meaning of the Semitic root was clarified recently in a blog post actually by Ahmad al-Shaddad. And I asked Ahmad to actually turn this into an article. He hasn't had time yet. So we may actually end up collaborating on that, produce a short note just for easy reference out of that blog post, together with some references from classical Arabic literature that I'm supposed to cut and bring together. And this is the original sense of the term, and during the lifetime of Muhammad and before. So Muhammad, because he's got an ideological program as well as a political program, and the Quran actually heaps a lot of, or rather, provides an ideological balance for the notion of hijrah. And by the time of Muhammad's death, the notion of hijrah has become so important that that Muhammad's successor decide to use the same notion and same idea to refer to movements to garrison towns. So initially, of course, still many of them actually come from a nomadic background. Many people who initially settled in Kufa, Basra, Fustat, and elsewhere still are nomads who end up settling there. But then the terminology they use stays the same. So even if you are a person who already comes from a settled background, who is not a nomad, who is sedentary, and then you move to the garrison town, the act's still called hijrah. And it's here, I believe, that the word undergoes a semantic shift and acquires the significance of migrating, moving from one place to the next in classical Arabic, which is why we have hijrah in the sense of migration. Because, like, I mean, just you said, someone actually migrating from Tirmidh to, for example, Basra is not actually like, I mean, that person is not a nomad. It's just moving from one place to the next, which is why the term hijrah undergoes a semantic shift in classical Arabic.
Okay. I have other questions, but there are questions from the audience. So, so I'm going to read the questions for you. First of all, Fred Donner, Professor Donner had to leave, and says that thanks, Mehdi, for a stimulating talk. Gives much to think about. Sorry, but he had to run to another appointment. So the question actually comes from Jidong Zhang. I hope I have pronounced your name correctly. And he says, thanks, May, for your very interesting paper. I have a question. If I observe correctly, your sources are heavily Egyptian from the perspective of geography. Did you pay any attention to the region of Khorasan where the Abbasid revolution started? In other words, was the fiscal policy uniform in the whole territories of the Umayyad dynasty as far as you see? That's also my question. Also, very good question. Yes.
Yes, important question, important objection, I would say. So as you can imagine, the amount of evidence we've got from the East, from the former Sasanian realm, is not as rich as what we've got from for Egypt. Even like Syria is more or less the same, save for like the Jund of Palestine and Jordan, where we've got a bunch of papyri, Kharbatul Merd and Nisan and some other places. From Syria proper, what is now the Arab Republic of Syria, we don't have much evidence. So it's also very difficult to talk much actually to sort of, let's say, to extend our conclusions to Syria as well. In Iraq, it's better because we've still at least got narrative sources and some non-Muslim sources as well, which are important, as well as some non-Muslim sources in Syriac and other languages from the Iranian plateau itself from the early period. And it seems that that they sort of confirm what was going on in Egypt. Or rather, they confirmed that what was going on in Egypt was going on here as well. Why is that? Because the evidence is very leaves much to be desired. Let's put it that way. That the evidence leaves much to be desired. But the thing is that it's only natural for us to imagine that in the absence of universal legal code in the early period, the conquerors in all regions just demanded lump sums and left the administration or the collection of these sums to local authorities. And for local authorities, usually the easiest way to collect them was to break them down as land and poll taxes among individual members of the community. So, and this seems like this actually breakdown into land and poll taxes is attested, I think, first in the East it's attested in the letters of Shoyah III, a patriarch of the church or Catholicus of the Church of the East, if I'm not mistaken, at the time. And you do have some other evidence. We do have papyri from the early Abbasid period, which are from the early Abbasid period. but there is something in them that no one has actually noticed. So a lot of work has been done on fiscal issues in the Arabic corpus, but the Bactrian corpus does contain some references to actually taxes demanded by the authorities from the local population. But these are not tax demands. These are the locals. This is actually just, these are some letters between the locals. In fact, that's why they're in Bactrian rather than in Arabic, talking about the tax demands that the Arabs, the conquerors or the rulers have made of them. And in them, they use different terminology. And the terminology they use is in keeping with the earlier terminology that we observe in Egypt in the Umayyad period. So it stands to reason to assume that at least some of the changes brought about by the Abbasids that brought about a new system that we see in the Arabic corpus from Khorasan and this period was of the same nature as the changes brought about in Egypt, and that the situation prior to these changes was similar. And especially for northern Mesopotamia, we have the evidence of the very important evidence of the Chronicle of Tzuflin, which suffers from several problems, as I indicated earlier, one of them being that translators are not Islamicists. And sometimes when it comes to these tricky issues, they sometimes make mistakes. One of the most important mistakes they have made is in this one passage about the abolition of the old stipend system, where the English translation has actually credits the kingdom of the Arabs for it, while the French translation credits le royaume de Perse, the kingdom of the Persians, for having done so, while the Syriac has got wa-l-kuttāb hada the Shi'ta, this kingdom of the Shia, the Shiites, which refers to Abbasid Shiism, actually. But apparently the translators, not being Islamicists, had no idea that this refers actually to the Abbasids. So they just omit the word Shi'ta without any reference to it in the footnotes or something, and produce either Perse or Arabs in parentheses as a gloss, which is actually the word used, the kingdom of the Arabs, which is actually the translator's translation of wa-l-kuttāb al-Tayyāyeh as the standard terminology used by the Chronicle of Tzuflin for the Umayyads. So the exact opposite of what the translator actually, which the English translation says.
Thank you, Mehdi. Yes, thank you, Mehdi Jan, for that. Professor Asad Zaman has also a question. Hi, Professor Zaman. Prior to Omar II, he says, Omar II's edict, could Jews and Christians be members of the Divan?
Jews and Christians could be members of the Divan from the very outset. So usually, because our narrative sources are prescriptive, they say that this is a Divan set up for the benefit of Muslims, but they contradict themselves almost immediately afterwards. So they first state that it was based on Sabiqa, but then you see other issues involved as well. For example, they also say that closeness of ties of kinship to the Prophet also played a role, or maybe simultaneously, whatever. But then you see historiographical polemics in there. So when it comes to closeness of ties of kinship, there are two strands of reports. One of them say that Ali received the highest rate of stipends, and al-Abbas was next. The other group has got the exact opposite. It says al-Abbas received the highest rate of stipend, while Ali got the second highest. Why is that? Because which one of them got the highest rate, it means that the person who receives the highest rate is your next of kin. If it's about closeness of ties of kinship to the Prophet's next of kin would have received the highest rate. So these sources are basically engaging in polemics as to whether al-Abbas or Ali were the Prophet's next of kin. So this is Abbasid era historiographical polemics between Alids and Abbasids. And we also have other reports about like the rates that Muhammad's widows got. Some of them say that Aisha got the highest rate. Some of them place Aisha on the same footing as the others. So again, historiographical polemics again about the importance of Aisha. So, but there are other contradictions too. The same actually sources go on to mention some non-Muslims who actually benefited from stipends. One of the most famous ones is Jufaina Nasrani, as the sobriquet implies or indicates, is a Christian, and he was. But we know of him thanks to an incident. Otherwise, no one would have told us that this person was enrolled in the Diwan. We know of him because he was implicated in the murder of the Caliph Umar. And then this continues just like that. In early Islamic Syria, most of the members of the Jund are Christian. Most of these Syrian tribes enrolled in the Diwan in Syria are Christians, predominantly. And this continues on and on. So even in the later Umayyad period, non-Muslims come and join. It's not just non-Muslims staying on the Diwan, but non-Muslims coming and joining. In the reign of Abdul Malik enrolls a number of Jarajima, Mardaites, in the Diwan, on the condition that no one could force them to convert to Islam. And they would benefit from, protection of their religion, rights, churches, everything. And they would simultaneously be members of the Diwan and receive stipends as well. So have I answered all of the question, or was there a second part to it as well? You're muted, Parvanjan.
I was muted. There are more questions, Mehdi Jan. Hold on, please.
From Asad. But yes, let's go on to the next.
Yeah. Faleh al-Sudani says, thanks, Mehdi. We know from traditional Muslim histories that taxes were applied on Muslim community. During the so-called wars of apostasy, some Muslims were considered apostates for having refused to pay their shares. It's under Omar, the second caliph, the Diwan al-Jund was set up to fix Atta's issues. Well,
yes, correct.
I think, yes, we know.
What I've been talking about only pertains to the system that was established after the conquests and after the establishment of the Diwan by Umar, not to what was going on before. And actually, so I have to offer a very important corrective to my own answer to the earlier question, but I don't remember who it was, but the person asked about Khorasan. So I said that this system applies to the whole empire. Well, with an important corrective, actually, save for Arabia. It applies to the whole empire, but Arabia. So the system instituted in Arabia was the system that initially came about during the lifetime of Muhammad, where nomads would pay a standard tax called sadaqah to the Medinan proto-state. And well, the so-called wars of apostasy, or rada, the wars of repudiation. I prefer to, following Fred Donner, I prefer to call them the wars of repudiation. Some of these people actually refused to remit taxes in the form of sadaqah. And then after the wars of Ridda, when they were defeated, they were forced to continue paying their sadaqah again. And the sadaqah remains a standard tax in Arabia. I've been collecting attestations of it, references to it, and the narrative sources, and it remains the standard tax in Arabia up until the second half of the second Islamic century at the earliest. I haven't yet been able to find other attestations, but up to the second half, to the reign of al-Mahdi, the Abbasid al-Mahdi, So up to that period, it's still the standard tax in Arabia, sadaqa. It's just the standard tax demanded from the nomads in Arabia. So the system in Arabia is different. What I'm talking about is entirely about the regions outside Arabia that were conquered during the reign of Umar and afterwards. And the Diwan also was actually set up by Umar after these conquests. So yes.
Wow. Okay. Nasser Hajlu says, thank you very much, Mehdy Jan, for this fascinating topic, and asks, do we have any record of, I think taxes it's
Yes.
meant here, for Manichaeans or Zanadiqe, as you mentioned, Zoroastrians? Could someone other than a Muslim become a member of the Divan, which you just answered? But about the Zanadiqe and Zoroastrians, Mehdi, that's a good question also.
Yes. I don't know of Manichaeans. I assume, like, I mean, they would have paid taxes, some taxes, but they're not like, I mean, officially I don't think they're recognized, and definitely not in the Abbasid period. And yes, non-Muslims are, I mean, that was the whole point of my argument, that the Diwan is not for Muslims. It's just
Right.
for Muhajirun. And as a non-Muslim, you could make the hijrah. Yes. Shufayn and Nasani, one early example, continues on Jarajima, many others, Syria, almost the entirety of Syria, so on and so forth. And if my argument again about wala is correct, most of these mawali, many of these mawali, early mawali, were also like non-Muslims. Because wala in classical Islam is to affiliate converts to the Muslim society. But from my point of view, it's not for facilitating conversion. It's for facilitating membership of the Diwan. So many of these converts, like many of these mawali, could have been converts, but there was no reason for you to convert in order to become a mawla. You would only become a mawla in order to join the Diwan. So many of these mawali could, like, there are references like to mawali in Syria, especially like mawali who were members of the administration, and they have Christian names, and some of them are said to be Christian. So Sarjun is a prominent example. Sarjun ibn Mansur al-Rumi, the Greek, who is actually the head of the chancery under Muawiyah and Abdul Malik, and he was a mawla of Muawiyah, if I'm not mistaken. And he, if so, as a mawla of Muawiyah, he would be a member of the Diwan.
Okay, Mehdy Jan. Esteban, Professor Cristo Nagy says, hi, Mehdi, you have been his guest as well at the Majlis. And he says, Ibn Mughaffa also wrote about the ata, comparing his uses of the term rizq and ata may be interesting for your argument.
Yes, true. I mentioned earlier that there are some anachronisms involved, and especially on the part of religious scholars. Religious scholars continue to refer to the salary of the Abbasid era army as ata sometimes. So it seems to be because the ideologically laden nature of the terminology associated with the early Diwan, meaning ata and rizq, ata in the sense of the stipends, rizq in the sense of rations, that especially religious scholars seem to have an attachment to that terminology, and they continue using it even in the Abbasid period. While going through the chronicles, save for a handful of examples which can be dismissed as anachronisms, as anachronistic references, predominantly the Abbasid armies are said to receive a cash salary called rizq. This isn't like the rations of the Umayyad period, but rizq, a standard salary. And yeah, I'll check. Thank you. I'll check again where Ibn al-Mughaffa refers to the salary of the army as ata. Is it the salary of the army as ata, or just because in the Abbasid period, rather confusingly, ata could be bonuses for the army in the literal sense of the word. So ata is a bonus for the army in the Abbasid period.
Thank you, Mehdi. Professor Zaman thanks you and says excellent. And now Nasser Hajlu asks again that the Dabirs or Katibun who wrote Mushaf were necessarily a part of Divan? Were they necessarily a part of Divan? If so, did we know of any Manichaean writer? We see a lot of writing techniques that came from them, so we can consider these Dabirs as part of Divan?
Not necessarily. So not a scribe who actually copied the text, any text religious otherwise, was not necessarily a member of the Diwan. Actually, there's an interesting example brought to my attention by a colleague from the Musannaf of Abdurrazzaq, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, where a Muslim scholar pays a random Christian from the countryside to just copy a Musaf for him, to copy the Quran for him. But the guy is Christian from not even from the mosque, from the countryside, so presumably not a member of the Diwan. So that kind of thing can happen. But Manichaeans, not sure. I cannot think of any off the top of my head.
Gladys friend Murphy says that she has to leave. She had to leave Mehdi Jan, and thanks you for a brilliant talk. And yes, so the Esteban also says that's the point. He might mean something different by the two, and this can strengthen your argument.
Yes, yes.
Smiley face.
Yeah, that's actually something I talk about as well, that at time the Abbasid period becomes, in the literal, I mean, they just use these words in its literal sense. Ata could actually be a reference to a gift or endowment, or I don't know, bonus or whatever, yes.
Nasser Hajlu also thanks you a lot. We have another question from our previous guest.
There's a question after Ahmed Attasi.
What, my love?
Ahmed Attasi, there's a question up there. Thank you. Can we have the full reference of the Syriac papyrus that refers to the Abbasids as Shiites? It's not a papyrus, it's a chronicle.
Oh, yeah.
Chronicle of Zuqmin. And this is a well-established fact that the Abbasid, Shia could be partisan. And if you want, like, there are also references to it, Shia ben al-Abbas or and such like. And the literary source material as well, Arabic, a Muslim literary source material as well. Very handy, actually, article on the topic would be the Brotor's, I think from 3 years ago, article, The Parting of the Ways Between Abbasid and Alid Shiism, in the Journal of Abbasid, published in the Journal of Abbasid Studies.
Okay, excellent, Mehdi Jan. Muhammad Mutaz also thanks you. You're seeing these for an interesting talk. And Karen Pinto asks, is it possible, I'm sorry, Mehdi, can you read it?
Yes, is it possible that the news sources from Afghanistan that Arzu Azad is sharing online may help to expand our understanding of the Abbasid revolution? Also, could you please restate your theory about Hijra? Thanks for a thought-provoking talk. So, well, I haven't been catching up with Arzu's latest discoveries, but last time I talked to her, and this was just like 2 or 3 months ago, she told me that most of the material they are unearthing comes from a later period, much later period, like at least a few centuries later. So they cannot be of immediate interest to this project. But I'll look around and see if there are any interesting material in them when when I'm able to actually focus on this project full time. Thank you. As for Hijra, so Hijra, literally the Semitic root means to settle, to adopt a sedentary lifestyle. And and during the lifetime of Muhammad introduces hijrah as a religiously laden act, as an act that's very well, that's very desired, and those who want to actually make sacrifices for their religion and the path of God should do, and that kind of thing. But there's a political dimension to this statement as well, because it wants the nomads to actually settle in the vicinity of Medina so that he can control them more easily. The Quran is full of actually long is against nomads who failed to make the hijrah, and for different reasons they seem to be very unruly because they are nomads. They are very unruly, and they seem to be not to be very easily governed. So that's the problem that a proto-state has got with nomads. But the theological dimension demands that hijrah become a religious act as well. And then after the death of Muhammad, his successors continue to use this idea, this notion of hijrah, to refer to acts of settlement in garrison towns and the newly conquered territories, even when they continue to use the word, even when the person settling there is not a nomad anymore, but comes from a sedentary background, which is how I think the term hijrah undergoes a semantic shift, acquires the secondary acceptation of migrating from one place to the next, as against just settling, adopting a sedentary lifestyle as against the nomad, which was the earlier significance of the term.
Mm-hmm. Mehdy, can you field your own questions so I could concentrate on your answers, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
How does the transformation to the religious-based Abbasid system put less strain on the government than the hijrah-based one? Were there less Muslims than hijrah? No, it doesn't put less stress on the government, less strain on the government. It's the demand on the part of the converts that forces the government to do this, because the new government has actually won power thanks to these new converts. They have joined the Abbasid cause. These people, throughout the Umayyad period, the Marwanid period, demanded accommodation to be accommodated by the government, demanded that the government recognize their hijrah, demanded that the government start paying them, demanded that the government start treating them like the rest of the muhajir. The government failed to do so. As a result, they joined the opposition. They were left as a constituency to be courted by these rebels. And one of these rebel groups, meaning the Abbasids, managed to attain power, overthrow the Umayyads. And because they have managed to attain the power, thanks to this group, they had to change the fiscal regime in favor of their supporters. Though this would have caused problem for the government, because everyone would have converted to Islam and then stopped paying taxes. So there are tax categories that become more actually forcefully enforced for Muslims in the Abbasid period as well, to stop government coffers from suffering as a consequence. So actually the level of enforcement is so harsh that even sometimes non-Muslim sources penned by Christian monks express their sympathy for Muslim taxpayers who've been subjected to such harsh exaction by the Abbasids. You're muted, Parvanajan, again.
Yes, I'm sorry. By that, I just was repeating by the Abbasids. Professor Zaman has a question. I suggest you unmute yourself, please, and ask your question.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, just a slight corrective. I'm not a professor yet, but hopefully one day.
Sure, sure.
In any case, I had a question about the Ahl al-Dhimma in the Quran then, because if I understand you correctly, by the time of the Abbasids, the Dhimma is retroactively prescribed in a way that non-Muslims have to pay for it. If that's the case, then at the time of the Quranic verse, like, who is paying it, and what is the reason that they're paying it for? And also, just one addition, I was with al-Jalad maybe a few days ago, and he glossed, according to I can't remember the name of the papyrus now. It's the earliest one, PERF. He said he glossed Muhammad there as a colonialist.
Yes. Yes. Well, literally, colonial were Roman colonies. Basically, that's where the word colony comes from, established to help with the administration of conquered territories, and they fulfill the exact same function as the Amsar. So coloniae are basically, like, you can translate Misr as colonia, Amsar coloniae, and then a resident of Misr, I call them settler, which is the English word for it. Settler colonialism is a word, of course. Like, the two words can be used together. I call them settler, which is the standard English word for it. But because Misr can be just translated as colonia, you could just translate a settler, a muhajir in Misr, as a colonialist rather than, or settler colonialist. Whichever you want. It's not exactly settler colonialism in the sense that we use it today. So I would actually advise against that. But either settler or colonialist is fine. As for Dhimma, the doctrine of Dhimma is not articulated in the Quran as it is in classical Islamic law. What we do have in the Quran is jizya. And the Quranic verse actually refers, jizya in the Quran is a lump sum, by the way. It's not a poll tax. So it's to be exacted not from every Christian or every, Kitabi person, every Christian or Jew or whatever, but rather from those al-Kitāb who refuse to submit to Muhammad's authority and continue fighting him. So, and once they're defeated in battle, so usually, there's a lot of commentary on the word saghirun in the Quran, which means humbled, literally, or humiliated. But this is actually an act of military humbling, military humiliation, because the word is attested one other time in the Quran, but again in the military context. In both cases, saghirun in the Quran is attested in a military context and seems to refer to a military defeat. So humbled, not in the sense of literally physically abused or humiliated, but rather humbled in the sense of militarily defeated. So once you oppose Muhammad's authority, get defeated, you have to pay him taxes in the Quran. And it's a lump sum. Jizya in the Quran is a lump sum. There is no evidence, no argument, no sensible argument that's not based on classical Islamic law can read jizya as a poll tax here. And jizya in the early Arabic papyri from the Umayyad period actually means a standard tax in cash. Could be land tax, could be a lump sum demanded by the government from a total district, from a whole district, could be taxes demanded from individuals, whatever. It does not mean a poll tax. So assuming there is some continuity here, further evidence that jizya in the Quran does not mean a poll tax. And it's got to do mostly with a military defeat on the part of the opponents, or at least the Kitabi opponents. The mushrikun have got no place. But the Kitabi opponents, can be accommodated.
I see. Do you happen to know of any old South Arabian precedent that preceded the Quran in this?
For jizya?
Yes, for jizya.
I think jizya is actually a Persian term, or it's actually a Semitic term. let's say it's a Semitic term attested, I think, in some Semitic languages, but it's actually, it comes to Arabic and the Quran via Sasanian administration, the Sasanian administration, because this actually, it's, I think, even older than the Sasanians. I think it's first attested in Old Imperial Aramaic from the Achaemenid period. So the Achaemenids called the taxes, like, I mean, using terms from the same root as jizya. And then it continues to be used in the Iranian Empire all the way to the Sasanian period. And then it's taken over by Muslims twice, actually. Once in the Quran, once after the conquests. And I believe, because like this is what jizya initially meant, I believe our later Arabic sources that talk about jizya in the Sasanian period also mean the same thing. The jizya in the Sasanian period as also cash and tax. And then that when the sources talk about the nature of Qutra, the first is tax reform. It's actually about the transition from taxation in cash to taxation in kind, taxation in cash, based on my understanding of the term jizya and kharaj. And this context, which has been misunderstood by later Muslim compilers of these sources, as well as historians of Sin Iran, have just subscribed to the classical Islamic view because they were not aware of advancements in early Islamic Arabic papyrology, thinking that it's not relevant to them, but it is because their sources are Islamic.
So something like the nations bringing gifts to Darius or something like that. That would be the functional equivalent?
No, the actual taxes. The actual taxes.
Oh, okay.
Not gifts. The actual taxes are from the same Semitic root, referred to with the same, if I remember correctly. It's tested in Imperial Aramaic, which was the administrative language of the Achaemenid Empire. So that would it be, but I wouldn't know the details, so I wouldn't be able to answer your question about the details of what kind of taxes these were or something in the Achaemenid period. I can only talk about the Sasanian period, which is like, I mean, in continuity with the early Islamic period, and for which we've got, I mean, virtually the only sources we've got on the on Sasanian tax administration are in Persian and Arabic, which I can read, but I don't read Imperial Arabic. So,
well, it's wonderful. Thank you so much for your help.
Thank you. Parvan muted. You are muted again.
Okay, so can you read?
Yeah, I think I just thank you. Like, thank you for attending. So I think there are no more questions. Yes.
No. I before we round up, I have a critical question, if you will, Mehdy Jan. Define conversion for me, and give me a periodization, and tell me what conversion to what.
Oh well.
No, but I mean, just give me what. I just want to know where you're coming from.
I think maybe this is something of
another
medical opinion, but I would say that yes, early on, like, I mean, it's very difficult. Like, I mean, you can look at an act of joining in the community from different perspectives. From the perspective of the person who does this, from the perspective of the community this person joins, and from the perspective of the person's erstwhile community. So I made this argument earlier, and you were present there at a different talk at Exeter, actually. I said that I believe actually the Quran does not demand that Muslims, that Christians and Jews convert to a new religion or something like that. It just presents its arguments, its view of things as the authentic version of their own religion to them, which is one religion. Christianity and Judaism are basically one religion from the point of view of the Quran. It's just there's only one true religion, so you cannot convert from one religion to another. There are no religions, just one true religion. And well, so from the point of view of the Quran, if you join Muhammad and his community, you have not converted. From your own point of view, if you're a Jew, for example, in Medina, joining Muhammad's community, I don't know. I cannot read the minds of those people, and we don't have evidence for that. From the point of view of their communities, maybe some of the acts that they did in the course of their conversion, like, I mean, if you're a Christian and give up Trinitarianism, would your members of your erstwhile community consider you still a Christian? Depends on the person. Like, I mean, we do have Unitarians, for example, even today. Some Christians would not consider Unitarians Christians because they deny the Trinity. Some Christians would consider Unitarians Christian. So it's always a relative thing. It's difficult to talk about. But I think by the Marwanid period, when Islam becomes, like, I mean, the Islamic state or the caliphal regime starts actually publicly proclaiming Islam and publicly advocating for Islam, I think by that time we can talk about Islam as a religion, and Islam with a capital I as against Islam in the sense of just submitting with a lowercase I. I think by that point, and there are, I think those are, we drew actually the first attestations of Islam as the name of a new religion date to this period, to the Marwanid period. So I'm talking about the Marwanid period, basically, when I talk about conversion as such, as against communities.
I think we have to have a panel, and you will be invited on conversion.
You have to invite Harry too, by the way.
Come again?
Harry Month. He wrote a thought-provoking article on conversion in Islamic Arabia.
Yeah, right. But I have also, like, you know, I'm skeptical about the Quran and the accessibility of the Quran, even through the qaris, right? So yeah. Anyway, that's it. I mean, you know, the hadith collections are not even made by then, right? And the biography of Prophet is just being developed by, you know, around Mansur's time, right? So meanwhile, all these hadiths are percolating in the billions or millions, as the collectors say. Anyway, this whole issue, which is a kind of a central issue, it has been always problematic for me.
Absolutely. So actually, that's also another important point, that there are varieties of folk religion and even varieties of official religion. Who determines what is official religion? The caliph, religious scholars, the caliph's advisors. But the caliph is not one person. The caliph may rule for 10 years, 20 years, dies. Another caliph comes around, different opinion, different advisors.
Yeah.
Scholars disagree. So you have there are varieties in official Islam, official religion, and there are varieties of folk religion as well, even more. And folk religion is even more diverse. And then, like, I mean, if we go to the stories of the Abbasid revolution, we've got all these newcomers joining the Abbasid cause with all their beliefs, which are considered heterodox by the ruling authorities. Sometimes they're executed by the ruling authorities for their heterodox opinions. Sometimes by Abbasid rebels themselves. They're so beyond the pale from the point of view of these rebels themselves that they cannot stand it. It's a strange melange.
Yeah. It's a whole can of worms. Yeah. For me at least. So Mehdy John, thank you so much.
One more question.
I'm sorry.
We have one more question. Karen Pinto, I believe.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Through voice, she wants to tune in.
Okay. Or new messages. Oh, sure, Karen. Go ahead.
Should I unmute myself? Can I?
Yeah, sure.
So I don't want to, I mean, if everybody's done, my question is completely from, what did you say?
Please continue. I have time. I have time.
Okay.
I'm not sure about Parwan.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. But
Well,
the,
but
the
I do
reason
have
I say this, the reason I say this is it's not on the topic of your talk, but it fits in the period. And there's so many great experts present. So I don't know if it's okay, Parvana, I can pitch something like this. So I am trying to solve a puzzle. And the puzzle actually is it okay? Can I turn on my video? Is that a problem?
No.
Okay, so let me do this. Okay, so I'm actually going to try to not show my head. So I'm trying to finish a book on the Mediterranean maps is what I'm working on now to try to get it to finish the manuscript. And I don't know if you can see right on the top left,
Yes.
not the first, but the so not Sus al-Aqsa, but not the first one, but the second one. You can see the name is al-Basra. I don't know if you can. I'm going to, yeah. So I'm going to take my head out of the way. So of course that's North Africa. Okay, so it's not al-Basra in Iraq, which is fascinating in and of itself, and it put me on a big chase to find what is al-Basra, and as a result, I found this wonderful pamphlet book by Nancy L. Benko. I don't know if it's coming up, on the medieval town of al-Basra, Morocco. Now, what is the puzzle here? The puzzle is Fez is not mentioned, but al-Basra is mentioned. So of course, whenever I tell people al-Basra, they're like, oh, you mean Iraq? I said, no, I mean North Africa and Morocco, which no one has ever heard about. But in digging up on it, what I found is that, so when after the revolution, when you have the Umayyad exit to North Africa and eventually Spain, right? They found, so there is some confusion. So this is, so in this book, it's the only reference in the Benko book on basically archaeologists' work. So they found, in 789, they found Fez and al-Basra are founded around the same time, 789, 800. But the puzzle for me, and the reason I'm asking this, and why I preface it by saying it's from left field. It's from left field. It's in the time period, but of course not your talk. But you are here, and so many other experts are here. I am trying to answer the question: why is al-Basra on the maps and not Fez? So it's a left field question, and I'm hoping that maybe other people who are present also want to jump in and share their ideas. It's a fascinating question.
Yes, I have no clue.
Well, but it's so interesting, right? That they exit, and the map doesn't show Fez; it shows al-Basra and Morocco. And every time I mention al-Basra, people say, "I don't know what you're talking about, al-Basra and Morocco." But yes, al-Basra, they name it after al-Basra in Iraq. So I don't know. I mean, that's why I said, after your talk is over, it's a left field question, and I take my head out again so you can see the third name on the left. There's al-Basra. There is no Fez.
We can't. It's too small to see.
I don't know if you can make it big. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a background image. So.
No, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay.
Any ideas? Anybody present? Any ideas? Oh, look. Yes,
that's an interesting question.
Yes, it's on the coast. It's on the coast. See, so you can see Sus al-Aqsa and Zawila, and then after that al-Basra. It's on the coast. But the mystery is, why do they list al-Basra and not Fez? So it's a big mystery I'm trying to answer, because it may be, but so al-Basra itself is not actually on the coast. It's depicted on the coast in this map. It's not far from Fez. So it's just on this map, it's shown on the coast. Okay, so Merrill is why is it shown on the coast? Because some are deliberately interior, part of the interior track, and some are part of the coastal track. So that is a good question.
So Karen, we will all keep your question in mind.
Please email me if you have any ideas. I would love any ideas on this question, because I am really wrestling with it. So I'm sorry, I said prefaced the question from left field.
No,
related to
that's
the time
okay.
period, but
we're going to we're wrapping up. By 2 o'clock we want to wrap up. So thanks, Karen, for that. So I have three. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Mehdy. It was
Thank you for
an
having me. It was an
excellent
absolute
talk.
pleasure and honor to be here.
Yeah, it created everybody's clapping for you, I'm sure. It creates that's the best point about good scholarship, is that it creates more problems, more questions than it answers. That is fantastic. That is very, very valuable. Thank you, Mehdy John. I have a couple of announcements, colleagues and friends. Oh, there is another message. Is there another?
Karen was sending her email address just in case anyone had any ideas to send her.
Oh yeah, okay. All right, that's great. So I have a number of announcements to make very fast, if you will. Well, I talked about the collaboration with University of Essex and our colleague Professor Christo Nagy. That's we are very excited about that. I am extending an invitation to any other institution or colleagues who would like to collaborate with us and co-sponsor panels with us, or add to our presence at least virtually. Then I had other questions. I'm sorry, just give me 1 sec. Yes, not question, an information. Our next panel is going to be with Professor Jeffrey Greatrex, Professor Ekaterina Nechaeva, and Professor Scott McDonough, and we will be discussing the Roman-Sasanian relationship there. And last but not least is that I am asking you to help us with funding, because we have a lot of important and really incredible plans in the future, including perhaps hopefully in creating a center for Islamic maps. I don't know when that is going to be coming up about. I mean, we would like to make the center also, the circle also a center, so we'll see. Please contact us, contact me if you have any ideas. Karen Pinto is also sitting on a treasury, like Mehdy is sitting, and here are two fascinating, fantastic, really colleagues who have added tremendously to the field. And well, I'm sure you both are going to be going to the stars pretty soon. Asad Zaman is also clapping. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Ms. Salpner. I would like to thank Meryl, the Assistant Director of La Wunsch Institute, who has been with us, giving unconditional love and really being very helpful. And I don't know, I don't want to even think about it, but maybe Meryl is not going to be here next year, but we'll see. Well, she's going to better well, maybe anyway, let's not. Okay, I'm not going to.
Wish her the best anyway.
Yes. I wish everybody the best, and thank you all for joining us. And until our next session, thank you, Mehdy, very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Meryl. Thank you all. Yeah, thank you, Asad. Yeah. So if there is no other comments or questions, we're going to wrap up here. No? Okay. Bye, everyone. Bye.